Hello there, and welcome to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series, brought to you by Rethink Dyslexia, the podcast where we're breaking barriers and doing things differently. I'm Shay Wissell, your host, and I'm so glad you can join us. I'm a fellow neurodivergent, and I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I live and work. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all the tribes across our beautiful country and to all First Nations people listening today. Our podcast was born in 2017 out of a need to give a voice to the stories and perspectives of adults with dyslexia. And our voice has grown stronger year after year. We're now a globally listened to podcast with guests from all around the world. Join us for insightful conversations about living with dyslexia and other neurodivergences across all walks of life. Our special focus is on adult education, employment, social and emotional wellbeing, and entrepreneurship. We're excited to be bringing you this episode and invite you to like and follow us, or even better, why not leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dear Dyslexic podcast. Today I am, let me think of a new word than excited, thrilled. Anyone who's listened to these knows my lack of vocabulary. I am thrilled to have Deirdre on the show today, who's from Future Connections.
Future Connect. Yep.
I was so close, but slightly off. And we met, we were just talking about how we met, actually, which was through the Vic Learn Local Employment Networks. I might have got those letters confused, but Deirdre will help us unpack that big title. And also through some of the work that we've been looking at doing in the Brimbank Council, which is out in West region of Melbourne. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Deirdre.
Thank you very much.
I was really excited to meet you and to learn about the work you've been doing with young people who are dyslexic or have other neurodivergences. I've loved showing the video that your group made around the challenges during a job interview, and I'm really excited to share that after this podcast. But could you talk a little bit about what Future Connect does and the Learn Local Employment Networks? Did I get that?
Absolutely.
Right.
It's Local Learning Employment Networks, LLEN. So the VICLENs, or the Local Learning Employment Networks, there are actually 31 organisations across Victoria who are all funded under the Department of Education in a contract that's called the School to Work contract. And that is to support young people who are transitioning from full-time employment into whatever their pathway is. So we do a lot of work with assisting young people by having guest speakers come in so that they can understand the different pathways that are available. We might take them on industry tours so they can start to get a sense of what local industries are in their area. And we do quite a lot of really close work with the secondary schools around VET, which is vocational education and training. I have this awful thing where I start to speak almost entirely in acronyms because we use a lot of them in the space. So just stop me if I use one that's a bit weird. But VET courses are the certificate courses. So a young person might be interested in doing a certificate 2 in hospitality, or they might be interested in a Cert 2 in landscaping. Like there's a whole range of different courses that they can do. And we're very lucky across Brimbank and Melton that we have very strong what are called VET clusters, which are groups of schools that work together to ensure that all young people have access to all the broad range of VET subjects. And part of the requirements when they do a VET subject is to also do a work placement. And finding a work placement can be quite difficult for some young people. For others, it can be easy because they might have really strong networks. Their families know a lot of people. They know people who work in a particular industry and they can kind of call in favours from their networks. But we also have a lot of young people across Brimbank and Melton who might not have those networks. And so we assist them with finding work placements and support them through those placements as well. And you did touch on the fact that we do quite a lot of work in looking and supporting neurodiverse young people. And I guess that, anyone who kind of works in the employment recruitment space will know that we're just seeing more and more young people who come through who have got a diagnosis. And, when we talk about neurodiversity, we obviously know that it's often more than one diagnosis. So they might have, dyslexia and ADHD, which is really common, or they might have autism and dyslexia, or dyscalculia, which is often the forgotten specific learning difficulty, but they may have those as well. So there's often a mix of diagnoses that young people experience, but it doesn't really matter what the diagnosis is. We're very keen to meet the young people where they are, support them according to their needs, and really ensure that we're providing the support that they need at that time that's really going to work for them.
So many questions. I need to...
Sorry, I just said a lot, didn't I?
And you speak in acronyms and I get them all back to front. So it was interesting you said the unforgotten or the forgotten dyscalculia, because I feel like dysgraphia, the other one I have.
Yes.
Is the forgotten one as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
About the 4 disses. And yes, and even dyslexia feels forgotten within that broader neurodivergent umbrella at the moment. And it's interesting that you say they come through and it doesn't matter whether what their diagnosis is, it's how you can help them. But do you find with the work that you do that diagnosis is really important in getting some of that support that neurodivergent young people might need?
It can be. So one of the things that is most important, I think, is young people having a sense of themselves and being able to understand themselves. And that means understanding their strengths and also understanding the things that they find really difficult. And sometimes we know that a diagnosis will be empowering because it does allow a young person or their parents or their teachers or whoever is working with them to really get a sense of their particular kind of neurotype, if you like. And it also can give them a real sense of identity. I know a number of young people who find some real strength in knowing that they are like other young people with a similar diagnosis. So I absolutely think that it's important to advocate for young people to have a diagnosis and to be able to get that understanding, and that can help to really get the support in place that they need as well. But when I'm saying that it doesn't matter to us at Future Connect what the actual diagnosis is, I guess what I'm getting at is that particularly in employment, a lot of things around employability skills are things that can commonly be difficult for young people with any neurodivergence. So what I mean by that is executive functioning, being able to prioritise, being able to plan how to get to work on time. Those sorts of self-management skills are really important in the workplace, and it's something that's very, very difficult for young people sometimes, and can be especially difficult if there are executive functioning weaknesses there for a young person. So we're never going to look at, well, are you diagnosed with A or B or C or D? We're really going to look at how can we support you, and what is it that your particular diagnosis or disability is, what impact is that having on you, and how do we work around that? I think it's also, there are things like, if someone has a learning difficulty, how do we support them in training? How do we ensure that they can even complete a job application in a way that's going to be effective and get them through to that next step of an interview? So all of those sorts of things I think are factors, but as we know, no two people are going to be the same.
What are some of the different strategies or activities you do with young people, and does that carry on into the workplace? So if they've been placed into a job, how do you upskill the workplace so they have the skills to support that young person so it doesn't all fall into a heap?
Yeah, that's a real tough one. So you referenced before that you watched Marcella's interview, which was a video that was developed with a group of young people with disabilities, a range of different disabilities, and they really identified disclosure as something that was difficult for them. And so when we co-design, so when I talk about co-design, I'm I'm talking about collaborative design, consumer-led design, really bringing together a group of people to guide what comes out of that workshop. So we would never say to the young people, it needs to be this sort of video or that sort of video or this kind of resource. We really put it to them, how do we solve this issue or this problem? And so they talked about disclosure as being a really difficult one. You know, do they choose to disclose at all in the job interview process? And if they do, at what point? And how do they do that? And there's no simple answer to that, but it's certainly something that I would say most young people need support with. Some young people are lucky enough that they have families where the families can really support them in having those conversations and talking to them about how they might present what their dyslexia or dyscalculia or the other forgotten one of dysgraphia, how that might present for them in the workplace. But lots of times young people don't have families who have that skill set. And so that's where we really work with them to understand from a very strengths-based perspective what they have to offer in the workplace and how we can support them to make that disclosure.
I feel that as young people are coming through, there's more comfortability. I know it's not really the right word, but they're feeling more comfortable talking about and disclosing compared to, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago when neurodivergence wasn't even a term anyone used. So
yes.
They're young people, because when we go to talk in the workplace, we say there's going to be at some point in time an expectation that the employer will do what access that they have in school as they transition through school and that support that they can get, that there's the same level when they move into the workplace. And do you feel that the younger ones coming through feel more confident and comfortable to talk about that, or do you still feel there's a real barrier?
I think that there's a lot more comfort talking about it in general, and I think that there's a lot more understanding in the community. So, you know, if we would talk about 10 years ago, I don't think many people understood, you know, if you talked about someone having, you know, an ASD diagnosis or somebody, you know, we were still in the whole conversation around, do we say that somebody's autistic or do we say that they're a person living with autism? Like that seemed to be the big part of the conversation versus, well, what does that mean? And so I think we have moved a long way in the last 10 years in terms of having those conversations. I still think that it's something that employers grapple with. You know, when I talk to employers, so you know, we said before that we work across Brimbank and Melton, so sort of outer western suburbs. And whilst we do have some big employers, we also have a lot of smaller businesses that employ staff. And so, you know, big businesses have whole HR departments and have specialist recruiters and people who do that day in and day out. So they're very comfortable about what they can ask, how they can ask it, how they can frame it, and, you know, how they can also access the support that they need. Whereas smaller employers might only employ somebody once every 2 or 3 years. They're not so comfortable with it. They don't necessarily know what they can and can't ask. For example, we know that a disability is a protected attribute, but what does that actually mean in an interview? You know, and if somebody discloses, can you ask a follow-up question of what sort of support do you need in the workplace? Of course you can, but not all employers know that. And so they're the sorts of conversations that we try to have reasonably frequently.
So how do we empower young people to feel more comfortable in transitioning into the workplace? That's a big question.
Yeah, it is a big question. And I think that there are some universal experiences for young people at the moment. And, you know, particularly young people in Melbourne and particularly young people in the west of Melbourne, you know, COVID had a huge impact. We see a lot of young people who really are still feeling the effects of having been in lockdown and socially isolated for very long periods of time. they may not feel the same sense of connection to their school as they might have felt pre-COVID. Or, we're starting to work at the moment with year 10 students who did year 7 in lockdown, so they didn't necessarily transition from primary to secondary school in a seamless way that gave them that real feeling of connection to their school and the community of their school. So that's a really common experience, that kind of comfort isn't there. And also we're seeing a lot of sometimes diagnosed, social anxiety, but very often just a level of anxiety around interactions and talking to people and meeting people in the community and those sorts of things. So we might see that manifest in young people being anxious about customer service or anxious about, initiating a conversation with somebody that they don't know. So we see that as a universal experience for young people, that there's heightened anxiety around that. If we add in a layer of kind of, maybe self-esteem issues, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, all of these, then what we're really doing is just adding kind of greater and greater complexity to that experience for that young person.
Are there strategies that we can, if we've got parents listening or young people listening, that might support that space that they're in at the moment, or the feelings they might have around social anxiety or...
Yeah, I think it's really important to support young people to practice their social skills. So that's not necessarily something that was widely needed, I would say, 5 years ago. Most young people naturally had opportunities to practice their social skills and practice interacting, particularly with adults. That's kind of been missing. So I would suggest to parents that they do things like, if they go to the shops with their children, and when I say children, I'm meaning kind of any age. I'm not meaning just little children, teenage children as well. Really encourage them to have the conversation at the shop, ask them to ask the question of somebody. We really need them to be, ordering their own food, ordering a drink for themselves, ordering, rather than just ordering things through an app, actually having a conversation with somebody. It seems such a minor thing, but it makes such a difference. And it's one of those things that practice, because it is an incredibly important employability skill. And particularly if we're talking about young people with dyslexia, we know that often they'll have really good verbal skills, very good social skills, incredible emotional intelligence. We want to make sure that they're getting chances to practice that and to demonstrate that, rather than us kind of leaving everything in that digital space, which may not be as comfortable and as easy. We want to give them opportunities to do the things that they're naturally going to shine at.
At Rethink Dyslexia, we are doing things differently. As a global leader in creating inclusive environments for adults with dyslexia, our commitment is to provide individuals with opportunities to live healthier, happier, and more connected lives. Through our range of tailored services, including coaching, learning and development programs, consultancy, and training, we're helping dyslexic individuals, businesses, and organisations to better understand and support their dyslexic employees. So if you're looking for insights, inspiration, and expert advice on dyslexia and how you can provide inclusive practices and environments, then head to rethinkdyslexia.com to find out more, or book your free consultation today. Yes, we could have a whole nother conversation about the digital space, couldn't we? And the impact it's having on young people at the moment.
Absolutely.
Do you think there's particular things for young dyslexics that they should be thinking about when they're going through the process of applying for a job? And more broadly, those with neurodivergence, but
dyslexics particularly. I would suggest that if you have people who can assist you with a job application, for example, so we've also developed a resource which again was co-designed. So we worked with young people who were neurodiverse. So we had young people who were dyslexic, we had young people with ADHD, autism, Rett's, a range of different conditions. And that was facilitated by Chris Varney from the ICANN network. And we talked to them about what sort of careers resources do you need that are not available for you at the moment. And what they suggested to us was a series of videos. So I've sent you the link, Shay, for the first one. We call it Realise Your Potential, and we use the word realise with both meanings. So realise as in become aware, but realise as in actualise, you know. And so one of those things is to develop a resume. And so we talk in there about how you could ask somebody to check that and check spelling, check punctuation, all of those sorts of things that we know can be really difficult if you're dyslexic. And I'm all for, if you find something difficult and you can outsource it, ask somebody else to do it for you. So I think if you've got somebody who can help, absolutely do that. And in terms of somebody who can help, that might be family, it might be friends, but it might also be your careers teacher at school. It might be an English teacher at school. It might be, you know, a coach, a tutor, a whole range of different people that you have access to, even a Job Active or an employment network. So ask somebody to check those sorts of things, because often, you know, referring to digital, resumes, job applications, key selection criteria are done digitally. And if there's spelling mistakes and whatever, they're just kind of filtered out. So what you want to do is get an opportunity to get in front of somebody. So we absolutely use whatever resources you have available to you, and including the local learning employment network in that, and have somebody check over your application for you before you send it in. So that's really important. I think as well, we can do a lot of preparation around interviews. So there are going to be some standard questions that you're going to be asked in interviews. And this is where you really need to have that thought ahead of time and that plan ahead of time about whether you're going to disclose. So you may be very keen that you're going to, you know, absolutely tell everybody that you have whatever condition. So you might say, yes, I have dyslexia, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to say that, and I'm going to be really open about it. And you might then get to the interview and think, I'm actually not comfortable with this. I think it's really important for everybody, but particularly for young people, to recognise that when you go for an interview, they're interviewing you, but you're also getting a sense of them. If you don't think that that's a person you want to work with, that workplace doesn't feel safe to you, you don't need to work there. There'll be plenty of other opportunities. So, you know, you need to be really empowered to make these decisions for yourself.
Do you suggest looking on, if it's a bigger company, because a lot of small companies don't have this, but if it's a bigger company, to see if they've got inclusion and diversity or anything around disability to make you feel a little bit more comfortable that it might be safe to disclose?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really important. And bigger companies do have really explicit things on their website saying that they have that. And that's such a comfort, and it's so important. And also, that's where our networks become really important. You know, I talked a bit before about how parents might have really strong networks. What we're wanting for young people is that they start to develop their own networks. And those professional networks don't just arrive from nowhere. You need to be conscious of building those networks. And so, you know, once you're kind of in the workforce, you can then start to talk to people that you know and say, well, what is this company like? What's that organisation like to work with? You know, you start to get a sense of where you might be comfortable, and you're able to kind of plan your career according to where you want to be working.
Have there been any major pitfalls that you've seen young people have to go through that we could raise awareness of to help other people going through the process? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one of the things that can be a benefit and a negative is that sometimes certain workplaces will have somebody who, you know, particularly champions a specific group. So you might have somebody who like me, is a parent of a child who's dyslexic, who might say, absolutely, I want to support dyslexic people in the workforce. And so when I'm recruiting, I might go out of my way to make sure that they're treated fairly and that we're equitable, and we kind of try and remove the barriers as far as we can. But sometimes what that means is, if I then move on from my role, is there still a champion in that workplace who's going to do that, work to keep that person engaged? And I think that's the difficult thing. We need to have those people everywhere.
Yes, because what we tend to see is that the recruitment process, or the champions there, and then it tends to fall away once you get into the organisation. So they might have really strong inclusive recruitment practices, but then you get into the job and the manager hasn't been trained in dyslexia or neurodivergence, or the team or the broader organisation, and then you start to see things can fall apart.
Yes, I think that's really true. And I think that there can also be, there's that idea that culture can kind of destroy strategy. So there might be a strategic objective for an organisation to be very equitable in how they recruit, and they really want to have, dyslexic people feel really comfortable and be very supported and whatever. But if the culture isn't backing that up, it doesn't matter what the strategy is,
No, it's really hard, isn't it? Are there some key questions that you ever talk to the young people that come through your service around how they can work out if the culture is going to be the right fit for them? Or any questions?
No, that's not something that we've discussed specifically. We do coach young people in interview skills around, often you get to the end of the interview and they'll say to you, do you have any questions for me? That question. And so we do kind of talk to young people about actually taking that as an opportunity to really ask the questions that you want to know. So that could be an opportunity where somebody might say, how will you support me? Or I require such and such assistive technology. Is that something you're going to be able to provide for me? Is it going to be okay for me to use this or that? Or, even things like using headphones in an open plan workplace. Is that going to be okay to do? Is that something that people won't be comfortable with?
Yeah, I think they're really good questions to help young people kind of tease out, is this organisation going to support me if I do disclose? And can I get the right? And I think that's where I don't know how many of your young people end up using job access or know that they can use job access to get those workplace accommodations and adjustments if they need them.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know that they are fully aware of that. And there's also, if you're doing an apprenticeship or a traineeship, there's funding available through that as well. So sometimes it is really important when you're, if you're working through a job network or job active, you want to be able to be really clear with them that you want to ask those questions and what support is there and can you help me to get that in place. Even sometimes it's a step back to understand what support you might need in the workplace. I think the thing is that these things change. It's not like a static thing of I'm always going to need, glasses. It's not like that. It's something that might change in certain situations. If you're in a meeting situation, you might be very comfortable doing mind mapping and things like that. But if you're then on a Teams meeting, for example, you might not find it so easy to do those two things at once. So, different situations may require different sorts of assistive technology, and it can be hard because it can seem like it should be static, but we know that any neurodiversity is a spectrum and it can be impacted by different things going. I mean, even if there's a lot of noise in the background, you might find it harder to express yourself in writing or to understand something that you're reading. So, yeah, I think it's a really difficult one, and that's where the ability to advocate for yourself is really important and tough. That's a hard skill to learn.
It is a really hard skill to learn. And even in my 40s, I find it hard. I would find it hard still, I think, sometimes to self-advocate. And I think
absolutely.
As years, I think it becomes more standing up for your rights when things are not working. And that's really hard. And that's why I was interested in we're seeing young people feel more comfortable to do that than kind of my generation that may have been diagnosed in adulthood as well.
Yeah. I find it really interesting because I've worked in the autism space, and, you know, people with autism who can often be very, you know, black and white about things. This is the right way to do something. This is the wrong way to do something. And so actually they're very good at advocating for their needs and their requirements in a workplace, but in other settings as well. And I think that there's a lot that all of us can probably learn from that, you know, because I always feel like, you know, if I'm talking to an employer or a young person or whoever about accommodations in a workplace, I'm talking about that specific situation, but I'm also talking about the next person that's coming along, because they might need those supports as well. And so I think we need to remember that if we're advocating, we're not just advocating for now, we're advocating for our future, but also other people coming through and their future. You know, that idea of kind of keeping the door open behind you and not slamming it in someone's face as they come through.
No, it's really important. And we see that with adults where they've had difficulties in the workplace and they've said, no, I want to stay, or I want to, you know, I need to be here to make a change because this is going to happen to other people.
Yeah.
Huge thing when you're having difficulties in a job, to be not just thinking about yourself, but the others, because we know the impact that it can have on our self-esteem. And we want to make it better for everyone, really. But it's, you know, making sure it's open for everyone. And I think other communities that are really good at self-advocating. We're trying to unpack at the moment why dyslexics are so quiet. And I was with a group of young people the other week, and they had different co-occurring difficulties, but dyslexia was the one they were least comfortable talking about. And so we were trying to unpack why, and they were saying that the shame that's very easy to see our mistakes and for people to comment on them. And so it's, how do we create those environments where culture beats strategy?
Yeah.
Coming up behind.
I find it really interesting. So I obviously do a lot in this space, and I describe myself as boringly neurotypical. And I feel like there's such a role for allyship. You know, I don't, you know, I'm not dyslexic. I don't have neurodiversities, but I feel like it's on me to make these things more accessible, more visible, because I don't have those difficulties, and so I don't experience those prejudices firsthand. You know, I'm not being discriminated against because I have dyslexia or because I have, you know, ADHD or I have something else going on. I feel like it's really important for me to really stand up and make that point, and to make it easier for people who do have those conditions to be able to be open about it, to be able to say what their needs are, and to find ways for them to be supported through that. If we try and look at statistics, we see anything between kind of 5% and 20% of, you know, obviously as diagnoses have become more accurate, more young people are coming through with a diagnosis, but we're seeing kind of 1 in 5, 1 in 10 people who have a condition that's going to need some support along the way. And I don't feel like it should be, the onus is on the person themselves to always do that heavy lifting to make a workplace, you know, suitable for them. And, you know, surely we've been learning along the way with, you know, women who've had to break through glass ceilings, and, you know, people of colour and people of different religions. And, you know, we should be in a position where we can support each other and not just rely on the person to advocate for themselves.
I feel like we're on the pinnacle for neurodivergence, and hopefully dyslexia and other learning difficulties do follow in having to not self-advocate as much, and that the environment is just set up where it's inclusive design principles and we've all got access to what we need regardless of culture, language, literacy skills, needing space to work, like that. It's just the environment is set up for us to all succeed, rather than the exhaustion of advocating all the time, because it is really tiring.
Yeah.
So younger people coming through, you know, they have the energy that us older people are starting to fade.
Yes.
Well, that's probably a great spot to finish on. And I've really enjoyed the opportunity to learn more about what you're doing, particularly in the West. We're coming out to the West to Hobson's Bay for a big trade show fair in the end of July.
Great.
Yes.
Excellent. I don't think so, but I might put in an appearance.
Giving out lollipops, and they've got KFC vouchers. That's what I've been told young people want is KFC.
Absolutely. We do, when we do workshops and, other things where we have young people in our centres, we often, we'll ask, do you want pizza? Do you want whatever? And KFC is the universal one because, of course, we've also got huge cultural diversity across the West. So KFC is often halal and it's not beef. And so it fits a lot of kind of cultural needs as well as just young people like it for some reason.
Yes, that's what I've learnt recently. So it'll be KFC and lollipops all the way in supporting
the healthy mix, isn't it?
It's I know, I would not advocate for KFC ever. But if it means that young people remember us and when they go into the workplace, they know that they've got someone to call if they need help, that's the main thing that I think we're all
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for coming on the show. And it'd be great to have you on again at another point to talk a little bit more about some of the work you're doing to support young people.
Excellent. That sounds great. Thanks, Shay.
Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we are doing at Rethink Dyslexia. So head to rethinkdyslexia.com.au. And don't forget, if there's anything you heard today that was distressing, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36. Thanks for listening and bye for now.
Oh, yeah.